Hello, and welcome to this episode of BullionStar Insights, in which we will cover what is the difference between cryptocurrencies and central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs for short. Even though both of the terms, cryptocurrency and CBDCs, both refer to the concept of a digital currency, when we look at the characteristics of each, they are worlds apart. Cryptocurrencies are digital currencies which use cryptography to secure and verify transactions. And importantly, cryptocurrencies do not use any central issuing authority, whereas CBDCs, as I will explain, are exclusively issued by central banks. Think of it as follows. The whole raison d'etre for cryptocurrencies is to separate money from state, whereas CBDCs represent a complete fusion between money and state. Cryptocurrencies are designed to provide freedom and independence from central banks. And you can even argue that with a cryptocurrency, you are your own central bank, whereas CBDCs represent an entire reliance and dependence on central banks. Cryptocurrencies give you, the holder, complete control over your own money, whereas CBDCs give a central bank complete control over your money. Let's first look at cryptocurrencies. Across the space, you will hear cryptocurrencies being described by terms such as cryptos, virtual currencies, digital currencies, online forms of payment, online mediums of exchange, and cryptocurrencies can be in the form of either coins or tokens. For example, Bitcoin, the first and best known cryptocurrency, was launched in January 2009 by the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto as a peer-to-peer electronic form of cash. And Bitcoin is literally the unit of currency for the Bitcoin network. Likewise, Ether, which was launched in July 2015, is the unit of currency for the Ethereum network. Cryptocurrencies use a technology called blockchain, which is a decentralized database that acts as a secure ledger of transactions. This is often referred to as distributed ledger technology, or DLT. In fact, the first real-world usage of blockchain was when Satoshi used blockchain as a way to facilitate the launch of Bitcoin. Since the emergence of Bitcoin, thousands of other cryptocurrencies have been launched, but it's important to remember that each of these cryptocurrencies runs on its own blockchain. Now, the decentralized design of a blockchain means that no one entity or one group or one issuing authority is able to control the blockchain. Rather, transaction updates and processing happen by consensus of participants. And also this means that once updates to transactions have occurred, they are immutable, meaning that they can't be reversed. So this open nature of the network and the open public nature of the blockchain means that anybody can participate and anybody can view transactions and update transactions. This is called a permissionless blockchain. And it also means that the identification of the users remains anonymous. So because there is no central issuing authority of cryptocurrencies, they are often referred to as private cryptocurrencies. And private cryptocurrencies, also it's important to remember, were never designed to be regulated by governments or central banks. And for a lot of intents and purposes, they are still not regulated, but that is changing. Now, having looked at private cryptocurrencies, how do CBDCs differ from private cryptocurrencies? First, a few points of background. Although the majority of fiat currency around the world that has collectively been issued by central banks is not in the form of banknotes, but is in the form of digital records in commercial banks and central banks. These digital records of fiat money are not the same thing as CBDCs. Secondly, even though CBDCs have not yet been issued on a widespread basis, this is about to change. And over the next few years, many central banks plan to issue CBDCs. Thirdly, stablecoins, which are a subset of private cryptocurrencies, are not the same thing as CBDCs. Now, looking at the term central bank digital currency, you could say that, okay, we know it's a digital currency issued by a central bank, but that doesn't really tell us very much. And there is no set definition of what is a CBDC. So again, it's best to look at the characteristics of CBDCs. A CBDC is electronic or virtual fiat money, cash, which is issued by a central bank and is legal tender. Central banks are currently working on two types of CBDCs. Firstly, a wholesale digital token, which will be used by banks and payment processors and other wholesale financial market participants for transactions such as interbank payments and other wholesale transactions. And secondly, there is a general purpose CBDC, which is going to be issued to the general public as a form of retail transaction, and which will be distributed by central banks into accounts that people hold directly with that central bank, or else via digital tokens. So it is these account balances and digital tokens which are a direct claim on the central bank, their legal tender, and likewise the central bank has a liability for these claims. It is these general purpose CBDCs for the general public which are most important to the discussion here. There are many central banks already working on CBDCs. According to the Bank for International Settlements, or BIS, which is the central bank's central bank, there are currently 64 central banks launching a CBDC. 2 central banks have already launched their CBDC. There are 26 central banks with a CBDC in pilot or test phase, and another 36 central banks are working on a CBDC in the research and development phase. Some of the high-profile central banks currently in the pilot phase include the central banks of Sweden, Singapore, Australia, Nigeria, and most notably China. And some of the central banks that are currently in the development and research phase include the central banks of the UK, the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve in the US, and central banks from as far afield as Russia, Denmark, India, and Indonesia. So like cryptocurrencies, private cryptocurrencies, most of these central banks plan to roll out their CBDC using distributed ledger technology and to record transactions on the blockchain. But there the similarity ends, because unlike private cryptocurrencies, which use an open and permissionless blockchain, central banks plan to use a closed and permissioned blockchain and only authorize entities such as themselves and governments access to view and update transactions. So you can see that with this closed and permissioned blockchain, only central banks will have access to the records. So these central banks will issue a CBDC and they will know exactly who is holding that fiat digital money, who is going to transact that money, where they do their transactions, and what they spend those digital fiat dollars on. So you can see that it's a total lack of privacy and a total lack of anonymity. So how would you feel about an intrusive central bank knowing everything about your spending habits? What portion of your income or savings that you spent on transport, housing, fuel, entertainment? And for example, if you bought a plane ticket to a different country, which airline you used, which hotels you stayed in, which restaurants you visited, the negative possibilities are endless. And also, that is only the tip of the iceberg, because one of the more ominous features of central bank digital currencies is that they are programmable money. Central banks will be able to program start dates and expiration dates to these CBDCs. They will be able to program what type of goods and services that you can and can't use to spend these CBDCs. Also, which locations or stores or shops will accept these CBDCs. And probably most ominously, central banks will be able to exclude or include citizens in using these CBDCs and exclude citizens that they think don't meet certain criteria. So it's a form of social policy. And it's not unrealistic to expect that central banks and governments around the world in the future will roll out these CBDCs and then connect them to digital IDs and the Chinese-esque social credit system. So now let's look at private cryptocurrencies versus CBDCs side by side as regards their characteristics. Now, the only similarities between the two is that they both employ distributed ledger technology and the use of blockchains. But there are huge differences between the two. Whereas cryptos are decentralized, CBDCs are centralized. Whereas cryptos are governed by network consensus as regards their transactions and updates, CBDCs are governed centrally by central banks. Whereas cryptocurrencies are designed to be unregulated, CBDCs are regulated by governments and central banks. Whereas cryptocurrencies represent freedom and independence from central banks, CBDCs represent everything to do with surveillance and control. Whereas cryptocurrencies are based on permissionless blockchains and the permanence of transaction records, CBDCs are based on permissioned blockchains, and you can be sure because central banks and governments have the ability to interfere with transactions that they'll also have the motive to do so. So everything to do with cryptos is transparent compared to the opaqueness of everything to do with CBDCs. Cryptocurrencies are used and gain popularity due to free market forces and network effects, whereas CBDCs, like the fiat currency equivalent, are only used due to government force and coercion and the use of legal tender decrees. Importantly, nearly, if not all, cryptocurrencies have an element of scarcity and limited supply, but CBDCs, like the existing fiat currency, has unlimited supply, and central banks have a motive to create central bank digital currencies to infinity, i.e. infinite money printing. There is also the important aspect of interoperability between these CBDCs once they're all launched, and central banks will have the ability, if they code it in a certain way, to allow all of these CBDCs to be converted one into the other. So you can see that everything about CBDCs is the antithesis to cryptocurrencies in their design and structure. Not surprisingly, central bankers hate cryptocurrencies, private cryptocurrencies, because they represent everything that a CBDC is not. And central banks, you'll probably have noticed, spend their time nearly on a weekly basis now attacking private cryptocurrencies, while at the same time lining up their CBDCs for launch. Central banks will dress up the benefits of CBDCs, saying that they're in the public interest, or they aid financial inclusion, or they benefit monetary stability. But at the end of the day, it's all about surveillance and control. In essence, a CBDC is like a Frankenstein version of a private cryptocurrency, which has taken some of the parts of the private cryptocurrency and stitched them together with the motives of surveillance and control to create a central bank monster. When Satoshi Nakamoto, whether you think it was one person or a group, launched Bitcoin on the 3rd of January 2009, he or they coded a short message into the first block of the Bitcoin blockchain, the Genesis block. That message was taken from a title of an article which was in the Times of London newspaper on that day. The title read, "Chancellor on the verge of second bailout for banks." With this statement, what Satoshi was commenting on was that Bitcoin was created precisely as a way of opposing unlimited fiat currency creation and state control of money, and the destruction in monetary value caused by unlimited fiat money printing. Whereas private cryptocurrencies aim to decentralize finance, disintermediate central banks, and lead a revolution against the current financial system, central banks are attempting to preserve the status quo while tightening their grip on surveillance and control using their Frankenstein crypto monsters, the central bank digital currencies. With the imminent launch of multiple CBDCs over coming months and years, there will soon be choices to be made which will affect the liberties of our generation and the generation to come. Do you want a future of surveillance and control represented by central bank digital currencies, or do you want a future of freedom represented by independence from central banks? If you want to read up about central bank digital currencies, there is an article that I wrote on the BullionStar website, and you can find it under BullionStar blogs. If you liked this video, be sure to click like, and remember to subscribe to BullionStar's YouTube channel. And be sure to look out for future episodes of BullionStar Insights.